Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gives in the Bank recruiting podcast presented by BuckeyesScoop.com. I'm Marc Givler. I am joined, as always, by Bill Greene, and we have Alex Gleitman with us as well today. So it's a trio today. This is the Thursday, October 15th, 2020 episode. We are doing this on video, unfortunately for all of our watchers. So you got to look at us too, and on top of listening to us babble on about recruiting. So we're going to kind of let this be a listener-guided episode. We have a few things our listeners, our message board posters wanted us to talk about. We're going to do our best to hit on all that good stuff. Let's get right into it. I think the first thing someone asked on the board, they want us to talk about the official visits right now. Obviously, the NCAA has the dead period extended through the end of the calendar year. Guys, when do you think this is going to come back? We'll start with you, Bill. I mean, at what point do you think official visits may be a thing again?
Well, you and I have been talking since June. We didn't really think they were going to happen in this calendar year at all. And I think we were proven correct on that. But I think they really would like to see these kids be able to take visits. The only thing is, if you open it up in June, you're running the risk that in the past, we've seen 70 to 75% of the kids sign early. So you're going to be opening up official visits for a small percentage of the kids. Do they really want to do that? Anyway, they could reverse course and open it up December 1, for a couple of weeks. Could they do that? I think that would be like the most equitable solution. The season would be, so it wouldn't interfere with like bringing in a bunch of recruits and having them infect your team, which a lot of coaches are worried about. So, I guess it's a hypothetical to you, Mark and Alex. Do you guys think the NCAA could somehow open it up on December 1 and have official visits open for 2 weeks?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Alex. You got it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the first thing I thought about was Ohio State still plays in December, and the whole Big Ten still plays in December, and I think the Pac-12 will be playing in December. So is the NCAA gonna say, oh, because Clemson and the SEC is done, they could have visits, but then Ohio State isn't. And then, you have a team like Clemson or Alabama or Florida or whoever it may be preparing for the college football playoff. Do they really still want those guys on campus?
Yeah.
Who knows what happens? So I think it's like an ideal situation for the kids for that to happen, but I just don't see it happening. Not to mention, I think, you go into winter, you could see spike. We're already starting to see spikes across the country again. If you start to see spikes because it's winter and it's standard flu season at that point, it's going to not be great for the NCAA to make that decision either. So for me, I personally don't see this happening until the spring at best case scenario. That's just my point of view. I think I was talking to Mark before the show. I was like, if there somehow could be a situation where they like open it up in January after the college football playoff, and they're somehow able to like, even if they limited it to like, you have to drive, you can't get on a plane, and then you could take a rapid test and you have to test negative before you can start your official visit. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but to me, I don't know. Like, let's start thinking about that type of solution, and trying to get, a situation where a kid, or you feel pretty good about a kid not having COVID and not getting on a plane and not catching it, whatever, being able to take a visit that way. But I don't see it happening till the spring. That's where I stand.
Yeah, it would be unfair, I think.
Alex. Oh, sorry, Mark. Yeah, I think Alex's, his proposal is a lot better than mine now that you think it out. And now to do that, would they then cancel the early period for this year, make everyone sign in February to give everyone a chance to take those official visits? Would that make sense then?
I think yes. I don't know, Mark. I know you have some thoughts. I would say yes to me, but there's going to be early enrollees that are. I mean, I guess you handle it the same way as you did in the past when there was only one signing day. They just enroll early and sign that paperwork or whatever and get there. But I don't know, Mark, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I would have liked to have seen them extend this and get rid of the early signing period and do a late period and then let everyone try and get their visits in. And again, yeah, you can, like you just mentioned, you can always go back and do it the old fashioned way. And the kids that want to, enroll in college in January, they sign the paperwork they signed before. I mean, you could do it that way. Will they? I don't know. It's not, so much of this is going to be PR driven too. And if this is still a thing in December, if cases are going up, I think that's going to be something that the NCAA tries to stay away from. And I'm sure I'll get, a million people or coaches texting me, stop saying this publicly, but I don't think coaches want these guys around their players right now. I don't think they want recruits around their players. And I don't know when that's going to be a thing where they're comfortable with that. Certainly not during the season. No one wants to bring in 10 official visitors and have their star quarterback get infected because they hosted a kid from Atlanta or something. And he brought the virus with him and now the quarterback tests positive. So will that be a thing that coaches are okay with in April? Or do you have to wait for official visits until after spring football of 2021 is over and almost have an official visit window that overlaps with the kind of that off period that the kids get where you can bring guys in May and there's no spring football going on and there's no risk of anyone getting, of your quarterback or your offensive line, all testing positive because you brought in a bunch of recruits and from different parts of the country. I mean, it's fascinating to me how this has been prolonged and how it looks like it could continue to be prolonged. I don't know. I don't think we're going to see it before April, but I guess we'll see how it goes. I think obviously the optics are going to have to change from a PR perspective. And certainly I think the attitudes of the administrators and the coaches are going to have to change about wanting, outsiders around their program right now. I mean, I don't even think a lot of these programs want kids' parents around the program right now. We're talking about, the game day stuff where, parents get to hang out with their kid the night before and then get to see him after the game. I don't think a lot of that's going to happen right now. I think they're trying to keep that away. So, everyone's getting kind of kept at arm's length right now from these teams to get through what they need to get through. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm with Alex on that. I think we're probably about 6 months away from official visits. But we'll see how it goes. Another topic that got brought up, and we'll start with Alex on this, but I wanted to get to this. I thought this was a really good suggestion from one of our readers. Does the recent struggle for teams like LSU and Oklahoma help Ohio State out with any of the remaining recruiting targets? Alex, why don't you tackle that and give your perspective on that so far? It's been an interesting start for a few of these recruiting rivals for Ohio State.
Yeah, I think I never like to get too much into this team lost the game and how does this impact recruiting. I really don't think that matters. But when you look at the situation of a coaching staff, I think it does matter. And I think you look at a school like Texas right now, and if I was a highly ranked recruit, I wouldn't be committing to Texas right now because it may not be this year, but if Texas doesn't turn it around and make themselves a college football team next year, Tom Herman may not be there after 2021 if he doesn't even get axed after 2020, which is very possible. And do you want to commit to Texas right now when you don't know if Tom Herman's going to be the coach? Now, Oklahoma has certainly struggled this year, but I don't think Lincoln Riley – well, let's just say this. Lincoln Riley's job is not in jeopardy if Oklahoma goes 7-3 this year. Now, Lincoln Riley could go to the NFL, but that's the same risk you take every single year with Oklahoma. So I don't think if we're sitting there talking about a Tristan Lee, for example, I don't think what's going on at Oklahoma or LSU are necessarily going to affect him in a big way because of, I think Edo, I think he's a little bit overrated. I think he's a great recruiter. I think he's a player's coach. I think he had a perfect scenario last year with Brady, with Aranda, with Joe Burrow. I don't know if he could replicate that. I think LSU is not, I mean, they're killing it recruiting, but I'm not sold on Edo, but he's not going to lose his job even if LSU goes 3-7 this year, right? Now the seat will get a little hot for him, but he's not going to lose his job. And I don't think Lincoln Riley's going to lose his job. So when you're talking about a guy like Tristan Lee, maybe in a sense, if Ohio State runs the table, they go to the college football playoff, maybe they win it all. Sure, that certainly looks better for the outlook of the future versus in Oklahoma or LSU. But I mean, we saw a kid like Luther Burden, who's a top of the board type kid. And now we can obviously talk about, is he done with his recruitment or not? He just committed to Oklahoma after they lost 2 games. So I don't think that it's really, and, LSU's getting kids, they're in on top kids for sure this cycle, next cycle, whatever. I don't think that's impacting too much. But I think when you talk about a situation like a Tom Herman, or if you're being recruited by an Alex Grinch at Oklahoma, and there's possible coaching changes based on these results, I think that's when it could potentially impact the kid.
Yeah, Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I've always been comfort and relationships guy more than, winning this week or last week kind of guy. Alex touched on the residual effect of teams not winning, and that's the coaches getting fired. And if that happens, then, all bets are off then. And the deal with Tom Herman right now, I think it is going to affect their recruiting. But, Ed Orgeron can go 5-5 this year. Lincoln Riley can lose 4 or 5 games. It's not going anywhere. And those relationships that have been built with those players are going to far overpower the record. If you're just looking at, national titles, then every kid would sign with Alabama or Clemson. Ohio State's got 2 national titles in years. So it's not like they win every year, but they are an elite program year after year after year. And that's what you're going to see from Oklahoma and LSU. So with those schools, no, the record's not going to affect them. Texas, actually, what's going on there right now is going to affect recruiting. And I think, Tom Herman's got a problem right now. And the only way he solves it is by winning out or winning the majority of the games he's got left.
Yeah, I just think Lincoln Riley has built up so much capital here the last 2 or 3 years, just with his brand of being that offensive guru. I don't think that washes away over one bad year where he's replacing a ton of talent and they're kind of rebuilding a little bit. Here's one that's interesting for me. So Rajon Davis, linebacker from Mater Dei out in California, commits to LSU in January, gets caught up in the hype of the national championship run, and rightfully so. I mean, they had a great team last year. That was a great coaching staff. But Dave Aranda leaves. The defense right now for LSU is really struggling. I think that's a something right now. I think LSU start on defense under some new coaches, under new coaching staff, basically on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's a something right now. I know there's still contact there with Ohio State. He can't make the official visit, obviously, at this point. I'm told he's still going to try and come out at some point, which would be his 3rd time in Columbus, and they've paid for all of them. There'd be 3 unofficial visits. I think that's a something. Tristan Lee, maybe not so much. I think he's obviously Oklahoma's in there with him. He's going to be comfortable with that staff. I think he's going to be comfortable with Eddie O and the offensive staff there because we all talked about what's the offense going to look like without Burrow and Brady. Their offense has actually been fine. I mean, given what they've lost, they lost their offensive coordinator, their Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and their top 5 or 6 draft pick receiver opted out on them. The offense isn't the reason they've got these couple losses right now. So I think mostly, again, I would revert to kind of what Bill said about the comfort and relationships and think that's going to mostly hold up. But I do think there are certain situations where this gets a little interesting. I think Rajon Davis is one of them. I'd actually keep an eye on that one. But we'll see how that goes. there's still some time for the coaching carousel to spin and kind of see, which assistants, move on. Cause that oftentimes can be a thing too, is not just the head coach. Does an assistant get a promotion somewhere else? And that leaves a void. And, then kids get cold feet. And
Jeff Hafley last year, Clark Phillips, right?
Exactly. It's not always, everyone just kind of looks, is the head coach on the hot seat? It's like, well, it's not just that. It's sometimes the really good corners coach goes and becomes a defensive coordinator at another school. And that may have been the relationship a kid had. There are things that can transpire that go kind of beyond the head coach. And I think that obviously will impact some things down the stretch as this comes out. But so it's always interesting. I mean, we'll see what happens. Definitely something to watch down the stretch though, as always. All right. We got a few questions here. This is kind of a 3-part question. So I'm going to read this from our poster, Holtz. How often, and we'll start with Bill on this. How often do you hear about kids getting pressured to commit? Do certain schools do it more than others? And does this more often than not backfire on the schools, or does it actually work? I know that's kind of a lot to process. It's kind of a 3-part question there, Bill. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends, number one, on the coach. So let's Urban Meyer, and let's talk about Jamie Thompson, who sat in the office with his dad and he was committed to West Virginia at the time. And Urban said, I have an offer for you to Ohio State, but you have about 45 seconds to take. And if you can't see we're better than West Virginia and that I don't recruit against West Virginia, then you're not smart enough to play here. So that was Urban's pressure there. So, and it worked for him a lot of times too. So, and then it you're dealing with. I mean, is somebody, right now going to pressure Tristan Lee that you either take this offer or we're going to find someone else? Is Ed Orgeron going to say that? No. Ryan Day going to say that? No. So it depends on the coach and it depends on the kid you're dealing with. So that would be my, short answer there.
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. I think there's going to be situations for every school where they're in a position of strength to be able to say to a kid, look, we like you, we will take you, but we're not going to wait, 9 months until signing day. If someone else at the position that we really like wants to come in and be a Buckeye or be a Scarlet Knight or be a, Wolverine or whatever it may be. Right. Like, I think coaches, I'm in sales by day. I know Bill used to be or whatever too. And, like Bill always says, you either get the purchase order or you don't. Like, how do you get that purchase order? Like, every situation is different. For me, every approach with every client, every campaign, every situation is different. And so I think the coaches are selling, right? And so I think there's some kids you're able to do that with, and there's some kids you're not able to do that with. Zach Harrison, if Urban Meyer tried to say, dude, you have 3 hours to commit, he would have said, go beat it. But, when Jamie Thompson is sitting there with West Virginia and he's not a must-take type of kid for Ohio State, but they like him and they'll take him now, they need to know now. And if he's not willing to give that answer, they'll just go to the next Jamie Thompson, right? So I think I've seen it. It probably happens more than the average fan thinks it does. Sometimes it is a turnoff. Sometimes the kids just say, this is too good of an opportunity, I got to lock it in. And people forget the kids always, unless it's signing day and they're signing that letter of intent. If this happens to a kid in March, they have a better opportunity come along in October. They can just say, sorry, coach, I'm leaving for the better opportunity. So, I think it kind of goes both ways sometimes to some extent, where kids could force a school's hand. But I think, to answer the questions, it happens more than you think. I think every program does it probably to at least one kid a cycle, where they, maybe some of them do it a little bit different, and it's about approach. I don't want to throw out specific schools where I've heard some negative things about it, but I think, depending on who you talk to, you could probably hear a negative thing about every school doing it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you guys hit on it. It is about leverage oftentimes. what's my position what position am I in as a program? Am I coaching at a top 5 program? Who am I recruiting against? What are these kids? What options do these kids have other than my school? There's so much of that goes into this. It does. I mean, it'll happen at the MAC. I mean, it's just a different. It's just a different. There's levels, I guess, to it. It's just if I'm a MAC school and I'm recruiting against Youngstown State and maybe a lower tier MAC program, I'm gonna squeeze the kid. And if I'm an upper tier MAC school and I'm recruiting against the rest of the upper tier of the MAC and Cincinnati and Indiana, well, then I better not. I better play the long game here. So it's the same thing at Ohio State. If I'm recruiting against Alabama and Penn State and Clemson, I probably can't do that. If I'm trying to pull a kid from West Virginia or Michigan State or Kentucky, I can probably do that. So it does happen for sure. I think one of the famous ones to me was, you talk about Jamie Thompson, which in hindsight, I think a lot of people are going to say, okay, well that might've made sense. But this one in hindsight, it sounds funny now, is they did that to Denzel Ward. He camped and ran a blazing 40 and they loved him up and they offered him. But if he had walked away from that indoor facility that day without committing to that offer, I don't know that they might have let him go wherever he was going to go. And, Denzel Ward turns into a top 5 NFL draft pick or whatever he was. And now he's a Pro Bowler. So sometimes it's funny how that stuff works out, but I know, it comes down to leverage. How good is my program and how good are the other options this kid has? Okay. Let's, flip the page here. We got here's another interesting one for the time that we're in right now. How does a school, we'll go back to Alex on this. How does a school make a big move for a kid with no visits going on? For example, how did Oklahoma make a big move for Luther Burden? Let's kind of hit on the first part of that. How does a school make a big move for a kid with no visits going on? Let's kind of focus on that broader subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as Bill said, comfort and relationships. How, who is this kid most comfortable with? Where are his best relationships? Who is he trusting the next 4 to 5 years and his future with? And right now, the way to do that is these Zoom calls, these WebEx calls, these virtual visits, whatever it may be. I mean, there are some things that are very much the same: the calls, the texting, the Twitter messaging back and forth, just building that relationship over text message. And then there's the stuff that you would get on the visit, the academic presentations, the brand building presentations, the real life Wednesday stuff, the face-to-face with the head coach. Those things are still being done. They're being done virtually, which obviously isn't as effective as getting a kid on campus, having them just feel what it's like to be a player, getting around the players, things like that. They're taking care of, every school's on the same level playing field though. And so all these schools are taking care of that stuff the same way. So it goes back to, where are your best relationships? And, obviously sometimes when you get a kid on campus, you can click a little bit better with them. And so not being able to do that, especially with a kid outside the region and things like that, maybe it's a little bit of a disadvantage right now. But I think at the end of the day, it's a lot of the same stuff. It's, what are those conversations? Are you hitting it off with those kids? Does this kid feel like he belongs at this place? Does he trust the position coach to get him where he needs to be, both as a player and a person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's as simple as that.
Bill, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Alex hit the nail on the head there really well. And these schools have gotten so good at the virtual stuff right now. I think Ohio State does a fantastic job from talking to recruits. They really attacked this, and I think Mark Pantoni was kind of the key there. So Ohio State can hold their own with anyone in that area. But at the end of the day, Luther Burden felt that Oklahoma was going to put him in the NFL. And when you look at CeeDee Lamb and those dudes that have played there, why wouldn't he go there? They've signed top quarterbacks. It's a great offense, fairly close to home. Lincoln Riley. I mean, I see why he went there. I mean, he had great choices, obviously, and that was a heck of a choice for a wide receiver to make.
Yeah, and I'm not going to just regurgitate what you two guys just said. So I'll kind of touch on the Luther Burden thing real quick. So Luther actually did visit Oklahoma last season. So that, to me, is a kid who, look, I got these great options. I've only really been to one of them, and I can't visit any of these other schools right now. And so I think, given what they've done, what they've produced at the receiver position, how exciting their offense is, you've been there. You have an idea of what it's like there. I think that was the big thing for Oklahoma, was that he's been there. If he had been to Ohio State last October and had never been to Oklahoma, I mean, he probably commits to Ohio State. If he had been to Alabama in October and hadn't been to Oklahoma and Ohio State, he probably would have. I just think he committed where he had been, where kind of the known quantity for him was Oklahoma at this point. I don't think they came out of left field. Even when I thought he was going to Ohio State eventually, back in the spring and early summer. And even at that point, I knew Oklahoma was really right up there with them. And that was probably number 2 at that point for me. So I don't think, it's not like Oklahoma just, came out of nowhere, wasn't in a top 5 or anything like that. I think Oklahoma was always going to be Ohio State's top competition there. So I think he defaulted to the program that he was more familiar with at this point. And we'll see if that sticks. I mean, and I'm not just saying this about Luther Burden or guys that Ohio State's missed on. I would include anything that Ohio State's able to kind of land in the next couple months in 22 is, look, these kids are committing without visits. We have no idea what the next, couple months are going to hold in terms of visits and what that could mean in terms of locking your spot in and not having, without having visited, and what that could mean when the visits pop open. I think a lot of guys are kind of saving a spot right now and are going to, end up reevaluating things in 6 months or, whenever that may be, where they can actually physically reevaluate things. So I wouldn't get too wrapped up on 22 yet. I would let that kind of play out. I think we're gonna have some chaos here in a little bit. I don't know about this one. This one's interesting to me. I'll open this up to Alex and Bill, just because this one's not ringing a bell with me yet. Are there any guys that Ohio State fans are sleeping on that may end up in the 21 class? Bill, anyone come to mind that is maybe flying under the radar right now that could end up in the class? It does seem kind of like the targets are the targets at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've Daryl Peterson so many times, and the longer this goes on, the more locked in he gets with Wisconsin. But I think they need a speed rusher, defensive end in this class, and I think he would be, comparable to guys they've taken the past couple of years. So, but the longer this goes on and they don't offer Daryl, it makes you wonder where he is. So he would be a guy I would throw out there. And then, we've seen these late offers to in-state kids in the past. Now, whether that'll happen this year or not, I really know who that would be. But, I think for the most part, the guys are the guys right now. And until somebody out of the blue pops up for 2021, I think, the usual suspects are going to be the guys.
Yeah. Alex, anything come to your mind that we're not thinking of right now?
Yeah, I think the guys are going to be the guys, but at the same time, what was it? Maybe 3 months ago, no one really heard of Zen Mahalski. So I think maybe as you get the senior film evaluated and you get a look at some kids who may be flying under the radar a bit, maybe someone sneaks in. Is it Terrence Rankle at Massillon, Washington? I mean, do they go with another offensive lineman in state or in the region? I don't know. It's a possibility. To Bill's point, I think they need a speed rusher. Everyone's been talking about Justice Boone. Can they potentially flip him? He's still talking Ohio State. I don't want to say he's an under the radar guy, but I think, is there other speed rushers out there that could be flying under the radar? Absolutely. I think those are probably the 2 positions of need. Obviously, if you miss on JT, I think you got to get another defensive tackle, but I don't think they're going to miss on JT. So I think overall, like, there's a possibility. I don't have any like names off the top of my head, but you know, I had very little clue who Zen Mihalski was a few months ago, and now he's firmly in the class. So I think something could happen quickly depending on, you know, the types of film that some of these kids are putting out. And I know Ohio's almost done, or some of these kids are done in Ohio, but New Jersey just got started a couple weeks ago. So there's going to be plenty of film for these coaches to go through over the next month or so.
Yeah, I guess it just kind of depends on what the definition of under the radar is, because we've talked about that Ohio offensive line class. I feel like maybe more than any other topic here the last few months. So for me, that wouldn't really be under the radar. We've kind of talked about that a lot, but if that's under the radar, you know, for you guys or whatever, that's something to maybe keep an eye on. See if they move on one of those guys, a Terrence Rankle, a Thomas Remack, someone like that. Yeah, I mean, Alex kind of threw out Justice Boone. That was another name I thought, you know, because at least with Justice Boone, you know, I think it's gonna be a tough flip, but we know at this point that if Justice Boone called up and said, I'm flipping from Florida, I'm pretty confident Ohio State's taking that commitment. So there's at least one guy there who we know, I think, could commit if he wanted to. And he doesn't, you know, he's kind of a quiet kid, and, you know, but we've talked about him as well, but he's not, you know, not getting quite the hype of JT and Emeka Ibuka and guys like that. So maybe that's an under the radar name to maybe continue to keep an eye on. But other than that, I mean, they've moved away from the second tight end, and they seem pretty content just about everywhere else. Like I mentioned earlier, keep an eye on Rajon Davis. That would not be a under the radar guy, I don't think. Although, you know, I guess we haven't talked about, we don't talk about him the way we talk about some of the other guys because he's committed to LSU for so long. But, you know, maybe that's a name to keep in mind. But yeah, it's going to have to, someone's have to turn something up on film here for us to really go off the map here. All right, last one, I think. Do the Buckeyes sign one of the best linebacker classes in a long time in 2022, assuming they get Sean Murphy? Alex, thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what they have now, I'm not sure everyone in this class that's currently a linebacker, categorized as a linebacker, will end up staying at linebacker. But on paper, as far as where they're ranked right now, I absolutely think so. I mean, CJ Hicks, Dasan McCullough, Gabe Powers, you add Sean Murphy to that. That right there is maybe the best linebacker class in the country for 2022, and maybe the best Ohio State signed in quite some time. And then, you know, if you think about the fact that Gabe Powers or Dasan McCullough may not end up being a linebacker, you start to think about, okay, could they add a Justin Medlock, blanking on his name, but there's another kid I know that they like in 2022 from North Carolina.
Jalen Walker.
Yep, Jalen Walker. Thanks, Mark. And so I think
so many
they're
names
in a
to
good
keep track of.
Yeah, I know. They're in a good spot with those two guys too, I know. So you think about, you maybe add one of those guys to this group, and then it's absolutely, maybe not only forget 2022, it's one of the best hauls of all time. So I think they're in pretty good shape for that position. And I like the guys they have in the room right now. I think this linebacker room that they have at Ohio State for 2020 is one of the deepest and most talented that they've had in recent memory. So I'd like to see that group perform on the field this year, and I'd like to see the best players play out of that group. But I think Al Washington's got that room headed in the right direction, both currently and on the recruiting trail.
Yeah. Bill, your thoughts on the 2022 linebacker class, the potential there?
Yeah, we had talked early in the year where I thought you were pretty convinced that Gabe Powers was a D end, and I kind of thought he was a linebacker. Now I'm kind of to your point of view there. I've watched Gabe's film, everything that's out there, and he's going to get bigger, and I do think he's probably going to be that, definitely the Sam Hubbard type player and follow up. And then I think McCullough is going to get huge too. He looks like a kid that's really going to blow up to me and sort of be that hybrid DN linebacker dude. So then, you know, you're kind of stuck with CJ, who's an absolute monster on the outside. Sean Murphy is one of the highest rated middle linebackers in the country, and I think they're in good position to land him. And maybe they go get that Walker kid, or maybe Medlock, something like that. So, yeah, they're set up to have quite a haul linebacker. And, CJ is the one that really pops of that group. And, he might be the one that's kind of even underrated, even though he's jumped up in the rankings a lot. He might be underrated. And where I think they might be a little bit overrated. So in terms of rankings, I think it's going to be an amazingly highly ranked group. But, we got to see how they perform, and they've still got another senior year to play. So they got a lot of football left to play. But down to Powers is at the end. And I'm really coming around with McCullough as sort of that Swiss Army knife kid that you can use in a lot of ways, but maybe not as a strict linebacker, especially if he ends up being 260, 265, that it sure looks like he's had.
Yeah, McCullough is the wild card to me because I do think Powers ends up at end, and I've kind of baked that into my predictions and my thoughts on this. So McCullough moving down a second tier from safety all the way to DN, doing the real Sam Hubbard thing. That's really the Sam Hubbard move there, man. That could make things interesting. But my take is this: CJ Hicks is going to be a linebacker. CJ Hicks is, in my opinion, as good of a linebacker as they've landed in a very long time, I think he is a Baron Browning caliber athlete. And I think, unlike what they did to poor Baron his first couple of years on campus, I think CJ will from day one be where he should be, as opposed to the Bill Davis experiment and having Baron play in the middle and kind of stunt that development a little bit. So I think you have an anchor there as a 5-star outside linebacker. And then I look at Al Washington, who's going to be able, not only is one of their best recruiters, but he's going to be able to sell a very appealing depth chart. So I don't even worry if they get, the question was posed if they get Sean Murphy. I'm like, do they need Sean Murphy to have the best linebacker class in the country? I don't think so. I think Al Washington's perfectly capable, whether he gets Murphy or not, of going out there and getting 2 or 3 other great linebackers to go with CJ. And if you want to call McCullough a linebacker, and even if you want to call Powers a linebacker until the dust settles there, so with or without Murphy, I think Al Washington is going to put together a fantastic linebacker class. He's got several guys that he's right there with that, maybe don't have the ranking of Sean Murphy, but that I know they like. And so you give Al a shot to at least win 1 or 2 of those battles, which he's proven he can win. And it stacks up amazingly well on paper. So that lot to look forward to, I think, with that linebacker class. In 22, given who's recruiting that class for Ohio State and the depth chart, the opportunity he's going to be able to sell there. All right. Well, we got through all the questions there. I think we probably went a good 30-35 minutes here. So we're going to wrap up the recruiting podcast here for this week. We appreciate everyone listening. Please tune into BuckeyeScoop.com. You guys can read all of our stuff there. Alex had some great stuff this week on the 2022 offense. Bill's in there making predictions on the class outlook for 22, kind of some way too early looks there. I've got a couple of things cooking here for the weekend that I'm looking forward to sharing. So we'll have plenty of stuff. Make sure to tune in, and we thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.